funny. I was just watching a trailer for this new Maya Hawke movie called Wildcat. It's basically she's playing Flannery O'Connor. And
Oh,
so
wow.
it's based a lot on her short stories. And in the trailer, I think Laura Linney's playing her mom. But anyways, Laura Linney says to her, why can't you just write something that people would enjoy reading? Why can't you just enjoy like writing something that people would like to read, that kind of thing, right? And it's just funny. I was like laughing because it's like I'm sitting here going to talk to you about poetry, and you can almost apply the same question. Why why would you want people like, you know what I mean? Why would you write something that people would want to read in a sense?
The age-old question, definitely. Yeah, that's super interesting. I haven't heard of that movie coming out, but I'll be curious.
Yo, welcome to My Summer Lair. I'm your host, Sammy. I don't own a crying dress. I mean, I don't even like pants, so there's that. Younan. In this episode, you're about to meet writer and poet Cassidy McFadzean. The Crying Dress is the poet's third collection. If if you don't know what a crying dress is, stay tuned for that. You know me, I have issues with pants. Down with pants! So I'm not always current when it comes to fashion, especially with a crying dress. What stands out when you read Crying Dress is Cassidy ties her poetry to a number of locations. After she explained the whole crying dress thing to me, I brought this up. We tend to focus on the personal in poetry. You know, a relationship breakup or some unresolved longing or lost love. Those emotions are often trending in poetry, mainly because those common emotions resonate with readers. Yet locations in a poem tethers the reader in such a specific and powerful way. It's one of those things we kind of don't discuss properly. Okay, you know when you're watching a movie and it says that it's set in Philadelphia, I'm doing air quotes, or set in New York City, air quotes, and it's clearly like Toronto, or you remember those Christopher Nolan Batman movies? They were all set in Gotham City, air quotes, but it was clearly Chicago. When you know those locations, when you know those streets, it disrupts the suspension of disbelief. I know that street. I work in that building. Seeing those familiar locations instantly pulls you out of the drama of the movie and plunges you into your life. Location is a unique poetic tether, and it's one of the hallmarks of Crying Dress. Other hallmarks include space and architecture. In Crying Dress, you as a reader are surrounded by surroundings. I don't know how else to describe Crying Dress in a way that is tantalizing. Thankfully, Cassidy has the same problem, so let's start there. How do you talk about poetry, especially as easily as you talk about movies and TV shows? Stephanie, what do you have to say about all of that?
Sound, the final frontier. My Summer Lair is an enterprise, a pop culture voyage with a continuing mission to explore strange new worlds, to seek out new creators and celebrate established producers, to boldly go where no podcast has gone before. And now here is your host Sammy Younan.
How was the Ampersand review last night? You had a reading last night? How did that go?
Yeah, it was really great. Mississauga, it was like, it seemed to be mostly students, maybe a few from the community. There was a reading, sort of a discussion, and then an open mic.
Yeah,
So,
this is Sheridan College, I think, right?
yeah, exactly. They have a new creative writing and publishing program.
Mm-hmm.
Yeah, it was a great night.
How many poems did you read?
I read about 12 or so poems. I didn't want to read too
Mm-hmm.
long. There were two readers and also a Q&A. So, yeah,
Mm-hmm.
I like reading shorter. Even when they tell me like read for 20 minutes, I tend to
Mm-hmm.
not follow that because 20 minutes feels long. It's
It
like a
is long.
long
Yeah, but are the poems
time.
landing or are they connecting with people or like.
I think I'm still getting my sea legs. A lot of the poems are, I've been working on them for like a few years. So I've read them in Brooklyn and sort of, in Toronto earlier in the fall. I read a lot of the same poems. So I tend to have the like crowd pleasers or the poems that I enjoy reading aloud. And then there's some other poems that are more challenging to read. Reading the book, I'm sure you can tell the language, it would be a tongue twister, right? If I were to attempt
Mm-hmm.
to read it. So some of them I don't really read aloud. Um,
Okay, great. Maybe we'll have you read one of them because it's interesting trying to get you to describe your poetry. Like, there's no shorthand for poetry in the same way. Like, if I tell you this movie's like sci-fi or comedy, you're already kind of halfway there, right? Like,
Definitely.
even if I haven't told you what it's about, it's a comedy about whatever. If I just tell you it's a comedy, you're like, oh, I like comedies. You know what I mean? So, has it
Hmm.
gotten easier for you to kind of talk about your writing and your poetry?
It really hasn't. It's still, I'm pretty terrible at the elevator pitch, when
Mm-hmm.
they ask, what's the book about? A lot of people do have such a like compelling little blurb. This one, my blurb was, oh, it's a book about the early days of sobriety, grief, and like new love, like a new relationship. But
Mm-hmm.
that really only captures thematic threads, and even then, it's not comprehensive. But it's also a book about sound play, musicality, those sorts of aesthetic interests, I suppose.
Yeah, one of the lines from The Crying Dress, there's a poem called Little Island, and you write, as a
Hmm.
child, I spent hours searching for a
Yeah.
word that rhymes with orange, right? And that kind of sums up what you're talking about, right? Like, you're trying to find these words to express the words that you wrote.
Definitely. Yeah, I don't know if I was the only kid who I think I read in like some flyer my grandma had. There's no word that rhymes with orange, but I was convinced that there must be a word that runs. I racked my brain, went through the dictionary, but yeah, maybe you're right. That sort of speaks to the interest in musicality, sound play. There's a lot of puns, there's a lot of sort of little jokes
Hmm.
in the book. So yeah, sort of this playfulness and this sense of language as an instrument, maybe, not just a means to an end.
And you came up empty. There was nothing that rhymes with orange. You,
Not that I could, I'm sure maybe if you stretch a word or pronounce it differently, like even a word like foyer, like I say it foyer,
hmm.
but when I was in the US for my MFA, they pronounce it foyer
Oh,
in
oh.
some states. So I was, in my brain, it was a brilliant moment of wordplay. I was like using a rhyme or something, and nobody got it.
Okay. All right. Yeah, the pronunciation is kind of an odd thing too. Like, I know some people say privacy and some people say privacy or something like that, like a kind of a weirder emphasis
Mhm.
on that syllable. So I guess that would be kind of more fun to play with depending on the type of either regional accent or American and Canadian accent or whatever it may be.
Yeah, totally. Different readers will read it a different way. And because I don't know if you noticed in the poem, there's not a lot of like periods sort of telling you when to pause. There's like little hints, there's capitalization to sort of make that gesture, but I'd hoped, different people might read it differently or land on a different word, or it sort of lends itself well, I think, to opening up to readers and they can sort of take what they want from it
Mm-hmm.
because it is sort of fragmented and
Yeah. I want to pick up on these threads, but for now, do you want to just read one of the poems, maybe one from last night, one of the ones you like? One
Sure.
that's not a tongue twister?
Why don't I read the title poem? Because I've never had a title poem before. So the title poem is like the poem that you use for the title of the book. So Crying Dress. My last two books, I just really resisted because I didn't want to put more emphasis on one poem. But for this round, I thought, why not
Okay,
have
go.
a title poem?
Yeah, go for it then.
So this is Crying Dress. I said you could trace thought processes like a series of intersecting bridges, imagining each fragment opening up the text. You called it Pyrenean, corridors leading back to the point of origin, teasing a web with a knot at its center. Later, I unwrapped a dress your sister told you to gift me when you were certain you loved me, my crying dress. Its ribbons of blue, red, green. You called it triadic. Oscar's ballet, spoken word as directives, love as action, the movement of a body in space, geometric. And
Woo.
that's the poem. Thank you.
What stands out to you? I know I'm supposed to answer that question, but like, I want to know from your perspective, like, what stands out to you when you read that, or like when you wrote that, even.
Yeah, I guess I really love this sort of associative threads. Like there's a lot going on here, but I mean, the poem sort of describes what it's doing, like a series of these bridges, and maybe I could imagine every little fragment opening up the text, or, if it offers you one line and you think, oh, that's cool, or if you're like, what's Pyreneesian? And then you Google it, and then you're like, oh, I've seen that. Sort of these little points of entry or these little connections as well as the personal. Like it's also in the middle of this like confusing fragmented poem. There's like this moment of the speaker like receiving this gift, which
Hmm.
she strangely terms a crying, like what's a crying dress? It's
Right.
such a weird
Yeah, and well, it's also because the
thing.
crying dress comes before the or after the line of like when you told me that you loved me, right? So,
Hmm.
uh,
This like confession, this moment of declaration of love accompanied by a gift, which is
mhm,
such a like, I don't know, huge moment or
yeah. Do you have a
so yeah, I like the
Do you have a crying
strangeness of
dress?
it. This did stem from real life moment. I won't reveal.
Hmm.
I don't know if I'll ever wear the crying dress at one of these readings I do. I don't know, maybe the last one I do or something. It could be fun. But yeah, there is a physical dress that this did stem from an anecdote, but I also just like the idea of like, oh, like, is a crying dress? Like if you Google it, you'll see all these pictures of women crying. And I'm like, oh, is it a dress you wear when you want to cry? Is it a dress that has eyeballs on it, or
Yeah,
maybe the
yeah.
dress itself is crying? Like who knows? You could take it so many
Hmm.
directions. And I didn't want to limit like my conception versus maybe the reader has a different sense
Yeah,
of
so
what.
this idea of like taking in different directions, the last line is the movement of a body in space. I want to pick up on that
Mhm.
thread because your first book, Hacker Packer, came out in 2015. You were still in Regina at the time. Um,
Yeah.
has moving from Saskatchewan to Ontario like impacted your writing? Like, does location influence your work?
Interesting. I love that question. I guess I do move around a lot. I moved from Saskatchewan. I actually moved to the States to the Midwest for my first MFA. Then I moved to Toronto. Then I moved back to Regina. I spent some time in Brooklyn. So yeah, in this book especially, there's a lot of there's some Brooklyn poems. There's not too many prairie poems. That's such a compelling question though, because I wonder if maybe in Saskatchewan the poems look different. This book is certainly a bit more fragmented. Maybe that has to do with moving around a lot. I also know, like, during COVID, maybe my brain started to put,
Hmm.
I got COVID twice. So,
Oh
maybe
dear.
associations are now coming to me in a different form. I also experienced some really profound grief, and I think that affects the brain as well. So I think all these things sort of impact the poems and maybe how I'm able to write them. They don't feel as stable. They feel a little, unstable, more unstable than they used to.
Well, there you go. There's your shorthand for how you would describe crying dress. Yeah, because I mean, a lot of locations show up, like Kew Gardens, Christie Pitts. There's another line. I was
Totally.
walking through the annex at 4 a.m.
The annex.
Yeah.
Yep.
I mean, these are Toronto centric, most of those are Toronto centric locations, but yeah, you can kind of see those locations bleeding through. And then even then, there's generic areas like you talk about the ocean and the beach. So
Hmm.
you seem to always be aware of your surroundings and where these things are happening, whether either you're having grief or falling out of love or something's going on. Like you're aware
Hmm.
of like either the location or the trees or things around you.
Yeah, that's also a really great observation. I guess I'm just always perceiving the world. I'm always like, where am I? Why am I in this garden? What's
Mm-hmm.
going on? I think part of it, 4 a.m. in the annex, I was living in the annex. This comes up a little bit in the book. There's a few poems about the Unopri architecture, high rises in the annex where I lived, these super strange, like space age, kitschy buildings.
Mm-hmm.
And my partner is an architect. So I think I began when we met thinking more explicitly about architecture. And like he would tell me all these terms, all these things I had never thought about before. And that I think opened up a lot of the poems as well.
Yeah, you used the word architecture or some variation of it 11 times in Crying Dress. Or-
Oh no, I didn't count. Maybe I
Yeah.
should have.
No, no, it's fine, but it just as an observation of just to carry on
That's
what you're
so
saying.
funny.
Like
I love that.
is architecture the same thing as what we were talking about with location? Like, because you write in Pure
I
Evil, like,
wonder.
the most interesting part of architecture is the non-functioning, right? Whereas you seem to be writing about nature, walking through the annex at 4 a.m. There's a vibrancy and a
Mhm.
life, but when you write about architecture, it seems kind of almost still life, if that makes sense.
Oh, interesting. Yeah, I think you're right. There's definitely a difference between the way I write about, you're right, nature or these places I find myself in. I'll tell you a secret, which is maybe more of an open secret. A lot of the lines referring to architecture I stole from my partner. So he would say these lines, and I'd be like, that sounds so weird. Like, I'm going to use that in a poem. So are these like different voices. I think there's also other poets that I put in. I don't know. I like this idea of not just me speaking. Maybe I got tired of my own observations or my own
Hmm.
sense of things. So I wanted to put in some other people and some other sort of voices into the poems as well.
What you're talking about is I wear glasses, and so sometimes people will be like, "Can I borrow your glasses?" And they want to like see through your glasses, right? They want to try them on, and they see the world through your lenses. And it can
Interesting.
sometimes be distorted depending on how their eyesight is or if they're wearing contacts or whatever it may be. But like it could be distorted, it could be a weird perspective to wear somebody else's glasses. And I think that's a little bit of what you're talking about.
Totally. That makes a lot of sense. Yeah, I haven't had that exact experience, but I really like that idea of trying on maybe glasses or a different outfit. If we go back to the crying dress, he put on
Yeah.
somebody
A
else's
happy
shoes
dress?
and yeah, maybe a happy crying dress,
Yeah.
laugh cry emoji
Okay. That works,
dress.
yeah. And then what about
Yeah.
the spacing? Because you touched upon this a little bit already. Like, to me,
Mhm.
like, this would be cheap psychology, but I would almost seem like the spacing comes a lot from Saskatchewan, which is a lot more spread out
Oh,
than compared to like how bunched up everything is here in Ontario, at least in Toronto, right, where we both are.
yeah, interesting. I don't know, I think I got inspired by other poets I've seen sort of using more open spaces in their work. I liked how it looked. Um, Aesthetically, I also wrote a lot of the lines sort of as individual or discrete lines, which I then sort of composed or collaged together. So it made sense in that regard. That's a very compelling observation about Saskatchewan. I guess I was thinking some of these almost look like the high rises or the towers a little bit, but I take your point.
Back to
There are
architecture.
yeah, but they're also a lot more spread out. You're right. So maybe sort of both are sort of working here
You feel
a
it
little bit.
because I've been to Saskatchewan, I've been to Regina, and you feel the difference, right? Once you leave Toronto, even in like places like Winnipeg, they're not really
Mhm.
cities in the same sense that
Yeah.
Vancouver and Montreal and Toronto are cities. Like it
Yeah.
just feels everything's so open and like I feel exposed, right?
There is a lot more space. You
Mm.
can kind of feel a bit like almost claustrophobic, but also in the city, there's so much noise and chaos. Living in Brooklyn, I was amazed by all the garbage on the street, the rats. There's a lot of things to observe in a city.
Mm-hmm. Would you like when you're observing, like, is it the actual, like you said, the nature and the ebb and flow of the city, like the rats and the garbage and like that kind of stuff, the city life that's happening? Or are there specific, like, people that you like to watch, like maybe a couple on a first date or something like that, or like they're sitting at a
Mm.
table? Like, what is it that kind of captures your eye when you walk through a vibrant city like New York City?
Yeah, I guess my attention, I don't know, I have like this scattered attention where I'm like frantically, I get like randomly disrupted by loud noises, or I'm just kind of like taking it all in. I don't think I've written too much about other people, except there's a poem I remember where a rat sort of travels between this man's legs that
Mm-hmm.
I remember watching near Prospect Park, which is where I lived in Brooklyn, and that stood out to me. So I definitely put that in the poem. But yeah, the Prospect Park is so lively. I think in another poem, there's also people observing the birds in Prospect Park. So yeah, I guess that there are occasionally people, but it tends to be strange things or things that capture my attention, lines I overheard. There's a lot of artwork, so spent a lot of time in art galleries. That was one sort of positive part of living in New York. You know, there's so many amazing art galleries. I really took advantage of that.
Yeah, it's hectic. Like New York City, you can constantly go out and see things.
Mm-hmm.
It's almost hard sometimes just to stay home and like do work or write or whatever it may be. Like,
Yeah. Yeah, we got this advice from because I was doing an MFA in fiction. I remember our program director telling us, you know, all your friends will be going to parties, but you need to stay home and work. You're not going to get anywhere unless you put in. I think he wanted us to write 18 hours a week. So if we didn't hit that mark of writing 18 hours a week, you'd be quite disappointed. And we had to come to class and write down the amount of time we had written that week.
oh,
It was kind of intense.
Yeah. Are you still going for that 18 hours a week? Or are you increasing that? Or are you decreasing that? Or like, because this is your third book now. Crying Dress is your third book. So have you got kind of like a rhythm, I guess, in terms of how you write? Are you still reaching for that 18 hours?
It was always a hard goal to meet. I also write in a really like fragmented way. Like the poems especially would be written like on my phone a lot of the time when I was walking around, like a line or two here, or text myself something and later I would go back. But with fiction, you really have to sit at the desk, and I do a lot of revising. I mean, oftentimes I should probably just throw away the draft and start over because I tend to just not let it go and sort of painfully revise over and over. And you can't really put a count on that. It's hard to count when you're sort of working on a long-term project like a novel or something, because you might end up like cutting more than you thought you can. Like you've been working on it forever, but
Yeah, so does that mean that you're experimenting more with fiction, moving away from poetry in a sense? Like, even though you have written 3 poetry books, you want to try writing prose, I guess, or even nonfiction?
yeah, like actually when I first started writing, I was mostly drawn to fiction and I really wanted to write fiction, but I do find it very challenging and poetry just came to me more naturally. I don't know what it was, maybe the way my brain works or my tendency to, you know, play with sound a little more. In fiction, you really have to be cognizant of character motivation or plot, you know, things that as a poet aren't really coming easily to me. So I'm still sort of looking for my voice or my aesthetic in terms of my fiction. But yeah, it's something that I've been trying to focus on a little more.
For your poetry, are you influenced like by other poets? Like, is that what you're reading, or is it also like pop culture, like music or movies, or you mentioned the art galleries and paintings? Like, do that kind of stuff influence your work as well?
Yeah, definitely. For this book, I took some workshops with this Toronto poet named Hua Win, who did workshops on other contemporary poets. So I learned a lot from her. The workshops were initially in person and then they went on Zoom. But yeah, I'm influenced by like everything. Like in one of the poems, Powerpuff Girls,
Yeah,
the old
I highlighted that.
cartoon
Yeah.
makes an appearance, or, you know, a weird podcast or urban legends, whatever the case. Yeah, I steal from numerous sources. Yeah, I wouldn't want to limit myself just in terms of poetry alone or Canadian poetry, though I should read even more sort of widely than than I have been.
Hmm. And the interesting thing about Crying Dress is it's broken up by seasons.
Yeah.
The seasons go in this order: winter, spring, summer, and then it closes in fall. The poems in Crying Dress. How come you put them in a seasonal context?
Yeah, I haven't ordered a book in terms of sections before. So I was really excited. And the poems, they sort of fell into these 4 sections. And then I was like, wait, they're sort of all talking about the seasons explicitly or implicitly. So that sort of made sense. And then I wanted to begin with sort of the new year. So winter, January, wearing the puffers, wearing the coats,
Mm-hmm.
those come up in a lot of the poems. And it's so funny because last night during this reading, I actually skipped over summer and spring. I mainly read from winter and fall. And I don't know if that's, you know, as a poet, you're more drawn to sort of these the decay of fall or the winter sort of depression. Maybe
Yeah.
those are the
The
most
gray
fun.
sky, the gray sky, and all that.
Totally, but I actually ended up skipping over a lot of the brighter
Mm.
poems. I don't know what that what that says about me. But yeah, I had organized it into seasons, but weirdly enough, not that I can control how people read it, but I didn't have like a chronological narrative in mind. But if people you could, put that sort of chronology over the book, but that's not what I sort of had intended.
Do you have a favorite season?
In general,
Yeah.
I think there's pros and cons to every season. I'm sort of enjoying this sort of shoulder season right now where it's still kind of winter, but there's some brightness. I guess it would be early spring.
Hmm.
I've been enjoying Toronto. We've been getting some good weather this week. So maybe right now this is my favorite season.
That works. And shifting a little bit from Crying Dress, you're a mentor to Flying Books. Is that correct?
Yeah, Flying Books, I've been working with them for like couple years now, doing sort of one-on-one mentorships and that sort of thing, working with poets.
Mm-hmm. I've been to that bookstore a couple of times. You just want to explain a little bit what Flying Books is? It's kind of a nice, quaint bookstore. I guess I just did it. But you know what I mean? From your perspective, like, what is Flying
Yeah.
Books?
So Flying Books is a really exciting bookshop in Toronto, which is run by Martha Sharp, and she also has a publishing company which has begun publishing some really exciting books. And sort of attached to it is also this school. So there will be classes online as well as these one-on-one mentorships where you can work with a poet or fiction writer and sort of get some feedback on your work.
And how's that experience been? Like, how's the poetry scene in Toronto, or I guess the people you're mentoring? Like,
Yeah,
is there a lot of cool voices or up and coming voices you're discovering or reading or?
definitely. Yeah, I've been really excited to work with emerging poets. I also worked with a fiction writer the other day. And I think the exciting thing for me is that it's outside of like a university because that's where I did most of my teaching. And you have to deal with a lot of bureaucracy. It's also like super expensive to do a creative writing degree. And, not everybody might want to take that approach. So I think this sort of one-on-one working with a poet, and I've done it myself. Like I've reached out to people that I admire to get some feedback on my fiction. I don't
Mhm.
know, it feels like it makes so much more sense than sort of trying to work within the bureaucracy of university and these types of environments. The ivory tower, as it is.
Yeah, I think with sometimes with university too, there's just kind of like people are sometimes just need a couple extra credits, right, to get to the degree, and so
Oh
there's
yeah,
there's not
totally.
always the same kind of, I guess, commitment, right? Whereas when you approach somebody as a mentor for Flying Books, you're kind of more or less dedicated or a little bit more focused than you would traditionally in a school setting.
Yeah, and you're sort of meeting them like person to person, not as like, I'm the prof and you're the student, and I now must give you a grade on your like, how does one even grade a poem? Like it's such a challenging thing. It's sort of counterintuitive to what the process of creating artwork should be, right? Which is like a conversation or this type of thing.
What drew you to, like you said, you took poetry in Brooklyn. Like, what drew you to like taking classes into like writing poetry in a university setting?
Yeah, I think to go back to space, which you brought up earlier, after COVID, I really wanted a change of scenery. So, not that the MFA was secondary to moving to Brooklyn, but as Canadians, you sort of need a situation to legally spend some time in the US. And this seemed like a really great opportunity to do so. And obviously, I learned a lot as well. But yeah, I was just interested in a change of scenery. Also, my boyfriend was completing a architecture degree, so it sort of made sense for
That's
us to move
cool.
down there.
Yeah,
Yeah.
we're talking about your new poetry book, Crying Dress. You're going to be embarking on a spring tour that's coming up. I guess you already did like one show yesterday with the Ampersand Review, but you have more
Yeah.
shows coming up.
Starting off in Sheridan College, yeah, and now moving to, I have some events in Toronto. I'll be going back to Saskatchewan for a couple events, which I'm super excited about, as well as Montreal and New York. And hopefully in the fall, I'll get out west, but it already felt like a lot. So I had
Mhm.
to cut it off somewhere.
Is there a difference in the audiences between when you read poetry? Is there a difference in the audience between Brooklyn, Toronto, and Saskatchewan?
A little bit, I think so, but maybe that more speaks to like my community in those places. Like I'm not sure I'm not, drawing crowds. It's more so like who my friends are in each place. So in Regina, it'll be so great to have like family come out as well as friends from university, where I did my first, my bachelor's degree in and that sort of thing. At Brooklyn, it'll be more my MFA friends, probably. Toronto, the great community of poets that I've been, excited to hang around here. So yeah, I think it's kind of depends on place to place.
Mm-hmm.
We'll see. We'll see what happens.
Do you want to read one more poem just to give people another sense of the book, The Crying Dress?
Sure. Why don't I read the first poem in the book, which is sort of this New Year's
Yeah.
New Year's poem. So this is called Chamber Music. Ringing in the year with brutalism and velour, accidental, accentual outfits. Show me a building with no facing. The sparrow begging for crumbs rests inside the hollow of your chest. What does it mean to be vulnerable? I don't disguise my raw materials. Sadness is present, desire is present. Oversharing our worst selves, a ringing in the ears. I could live pressed against your body like a bird or polished stone, brutal in the same basic ways.
Yeah. I like
So that kicks us off.
Yeah,
That's
I
the
like
first
that
one.
the opening line is ringing in the ear with brutalism and velour. I wear a lot of velour, so I don't know if
It's
that's.
an underrated fabric. It's a great fabric.
It is a great fabric. Okay, good. Wasn't sure if there was some sort of subtle commentary or like.
No,
Okay.
this poem, that line, my boyfriend, for some reason, we were celebrating New Year's and we both decided to wear velour. We didn't plan it. It just happened.
All right.
Festive.
Yeah. Well, it sounds like that's a keeper right there, right? When you can dress up for somebody with velour. So yeah, it's called The Crying Dress, and it comes out early April. Is that correct?
April 2nd, House of Anansi Press. Yep.
Mm-hmm. It's a great press too. Like, congratulations. They're really cool people, good team.
Yeah, I'm excited. They've been great.
And for poetry, how do you define like what are your metric for success? Like, are you just like happy that you got this written and got it out there? Are you hoping that it connects with people or moves people, like makes them put on their crying dress? Like, what are you hoping? Like, what do you consider like success for a poetry book like Crying Dress?
That would be beautiful if everyone started crying in their various dresses,
Yeah, and they could send you like
costumes.
photos, yeah, for your IG, right?
Yeah, cultural moment. Let's make this happen. No, I mean, I think for me, you're exactly right. Like connecting with readers, hopefully it enables me to continue working on poems, whether it's maybe another book, whether it's, doing more of these sort of one-on-one workshops, that would be fantastic. But yeah, anything sort of that enables me to keep doing what I love, because I think I've been really lucky to be able to have this book out. So I'm just excited. I'm just happy to be here. Expectations are low.
Okay, that's a good way to put it. We ended up the conversation with velour and expectations are low. So that's always a good way
It
to
has
end
to
it.
be.
Yeah. So thank you, Cassidy, for like hanging out. The book is The Crying Dress. I'll
Yes,
post a
thank you
link.
so much.
Yeah, and I'll post a link as well to Flying Books. I really like that bookstore, and it's great that we have a new bookstore, a relatively new bookstore in the city, right? Like every now and then,
Definitely.
you get kind of sad because certain bookstores close or they shut down or whatever. And then in the last couple of years, we've had a couple of bookstores open up in the city, and I'm like, oh, okay, maybe we're like getting this ship righted.
Totally. Yeah, I think more and more bookstores all the time is really what we need. Thanks so much. Yeah, that was great. Great questions.
Yo, that was Cassidy, and her poetry collection is Crying Dress. I'm Sammy, host of My Summer Lair. Poetry like magic is fascinating. Whenever a magician does a magic trick, people instantly start to speculate. They come up with theories, wild theories to explain what just happened. They rationalize it and dissect it. The powerful magical experience is instantly autopsied. And I wonder if asking a poet, what does this mean? Or seeing these connections, is this a pattern? Is this similar to asking a magician, how did you pull that magic trick off? How did you make that magic? I wonder if speculation removes some of the mystery. And I wonder if I should have said spoiler alert in my introduction. Because over the course of the conversation, Cassie and I reveal a lot of the aspects of her poetry. And where do you now go as a reader? Did it enhance the experience? Does it make the reading better? Or do you know, once you know how the magic is done, it's not as fun? When you travel and you're staying in a hotel room for 3 or 4 days, like a short visit, generally you don't unpack. You're comfortable living out of the suitcase. As an analogy for poetry, we're like that sometimes. We don't unpack. We live limited. We take poetry at face value. That's nice. It doesn't rhyme. Okay, whatever. And then you go on your way. But, however, yet there's value to unpacking things. Even when somebody gives you a gift, and you know what that gift is because you asked them for it. Can you buy me this book? You still have an obligation to unwrap it and say thanks for this gift that I asked for. You got me exactly what I wanted. There's no surprise. You know what the gift is, but it's just cool and fun to unwrap it. As always, there's a lot more to talk about, and we need to carry this conversation forward, and we could do that at My Pal Sammy, a Substack newsletter. You can Google My Pal Sammy Substack, and bam, like magic, we went back to magic. It'll show up. Although Google's been struggling lately, I think Google has a tummy ache or something. Is anybody else finding Google struggling like the little engine that could? You can also go to mysummerlair.com/subscribe, and there is a box where you can plop in your email. Shout out to all the recent people who signed up. You people are dope and delightful. Leave notes, comments, whatever. It's all there. My Pal Sammy, a Substack newsletter. Thank you so much. I really genuinely appreciate it. And hopefully we get to be in the same room soon and I can give you a high five or a man hug. Because I do appreciate it. I also appreciate you listening to me in a Netflix world. Yo. Crying dress, yo.